Hey there, it's Seb Fry the Realtor here. Are you thinking about building an ADU in Santa Cruz County? If so, I bet you have a lot of questions. I sat down with Anais Shank of Ohm Design to talk all about building ADUs in Santa Cruz County. If this is something you're thinking about doing, then you definitely want to watch this video.
Anna, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Seb?
I'm really, really good. Listen, I want to thank you so much for making the time today to come on this video call and talk to me about ADUs in Santa Cruz County. I know you're something of an expert.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well,
I
speaking of that,
appreciate being
so
here.
great. Well, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, who exactly are you? What's your professional background, and what do you do
Yeah.
today?
Yeah. So my name is Annie Shank. I have a small business in Santa Cruz, and we also work in Austin, Texas. I have a master's degree in urban planning, and after I got my master's degree, I became really interested in the nexus between land use and transportation planning. So after, I don't know, about 10 to 12 years working for other people, I decided to open my own business. It's called Ohm Design, as I mentioned, and we do building design. We help homeowners design and permit additions, remodels, and new construction. Um, we have a little bit of a specialty with designing ADUs or accessory dwelling units. We've always lived in small homes. We really understand the need for well-designed small spaces and utilizing every square foot of building. And when I say we, it's my husband and I run this business together. So he's the creative brains, I do the permitting and do the code compliance work.
All right. Well, that's super cool. I didn't realize you had a master's degree in urban planning.
I do, yeah. It was a very functional degree to get, and I've always been interested in how people use space and how that relates to our culture and our habits, and how we can create spaces that facilitate and foster healthy and vibrant lifestyles.
Yeah, I'm also very interested in urban planning, although I don't really know anything like technical about it. I just, I find it to be a very fascinating field of study for sure. And one thing that's really upended urban planning, I think, in California has been this whole SB9 thing, which that's really kindled the interest in a lot of homeowners and would-be homeowners about having an accessory dwelling unit. So you probably know a lot about SB9. What can you tell us about SB9?
Yeah, so Senate Bill 9 was a new piece of legislation passed a couple years ago. What it does is pretty cutting edge. It allows any property owner with a single family zoned lot to split that lot, to subdivide it into two lots, two separate ones that can be sold independently of each other, as well as build up to 4 units between those two lots. So there's some requirements that were written into the legislation. You can't be in a high fire hazard zone. You can't do this in wetlands or flood zones. There's some other constraints, but it's pretty widespread, and it's anywhere in an urban area you could do this. So most of the parcels in places like Live Oak or Capitola or Santa Cruz, those would all qualify. And we've never seen anything like this. So it's completely new for not just homeowners and designers, but also the cities, which haven't fully caught up to implementing Senate Bill 9 yet, but we're just starting to see some of those processes come into play.
So as I understand it, SB9 basically allows you basically by right to do this. Is that correct? I mean, like, unless
Yep.
unless it's one of these reasons why he's excluded because of high fire hazard zone, wetlands, or whatever. Basically, you can do this on any parcel, pretty much. That's not automatically denied.
Right. It's for single family zone parcels. So one thing to look for is a lot of times we see a lot where it has a single family home, but it might be zoned for multifamily. So just one little caveat to look at for that's mostly in the unincorporated county where we see those parcels. But yeah, any single family zone lot in an urban area, which is again, this is a game changer. There's been a lot of kind of talk about whether or not it'll really change things for the overall housing availability in California. But I get a lot of questions about it, and people are starting to walk through that process.
Yeah, so I've been doing this a long time, realtor business, 21 years now, and when I started, like an ADU, like almost every ADU was illegal, right? There were ADUs, but almost every single one of them was illegal, and it was always like a big thing, like I'm going to get red tagged, right? So like. Yep. That's really totally changed. And so like, what is the actual experience like for a homeowner now, or a prospective homeowner now, working under SB9 versus not working under SB9? Like, how has that actually changed in terms of your experience? Not yours personally, but anyone's experience in actually going and getting an ADU permitted?
Yeah, so SB9 and the ADU laws are two separate sets of laws. And really what's going on behind the scenes here is that the state has recognized that we have a huge housing need. And so the state has stepped in and started essentially creating land use laws or codes that supersede the local cities and counties and their codes. And they're still rolling them out. So there's constant changes in ADU requirements or forgiveness, as well as allowances for multiple units to be built on a parcel. So the two laws work together really well. They're the two sets of laws, ADUs and SB9, but they're different. So they're a little bit like apples and oranges when you're trying to compare them, but you put them together and you can really create a much more value out of a property than you ever could before. So the way I see the two laws combined most frequently by investor types or people who want to need to send their kids to college and would like to sell some of their land use investment, is that they'll look at using SB9 to split the lot, and then on the new lot that's created through SB9, build out a single family home and an ADU. And the reason why that's a really appealing combination is because under SB9, while you're allowed to build up to 4 single family units on between the two properties, you're restricted in size to 800 square feet. So if you split the lot using SB9, but don't use the building code aspect of SB9 and instead build a single family home with an ADU, you get more square footage out of the two lots than you would otherwise.
So, prior to SB9, it was so hard to build a ADU. I mean, like, it was possible, you could do it, like under certain circumstances. All the setbacks were really big, and you had to have a certain minimum parcel size, right? You had to, like, only a few properties would qualify for it. And because it was so unusual for anybody to actually do this, my experience was it was just really hard to like get those projects through the county, that the staff wasn't really experienced with this, because it was just kind of like a unicorn. It almost never happened. Is it experience now of a homeowner to go down to the county and work with them to get an ADU built? Like, is there like infrastructure in place now with the county that actually has made it a lot easier, or is it still really hard to like work with the county and get an ADU built even under SB9?
Yeah, so it is actually far easier to get an ADU built than it ever was before. There were a lot of things. Again, there's multiple laws that passed that kind of all stacked on top of each other around ADUs. But one of them was that they're required to be streamlined through the permitting process. So instead of taking, I don't know, 4 to 6 months to respond to the building application. A local entity has to respond within 60 days with either a yes or no. So usually what that means is they'll come back with comments within 60 days, which we will do a couple rounds of review and comment typically with any city or county. But it's become so much easier than it ever was before. And a lot of cities have handouts that really outline very clearly what you can do with an ADU. In the past, you mentioned that there were a lot of restrictions around building ADUs regarding separation, a lot of setbacks, heights, all of these zoning considerations that we typically look at when we're considering a building envelope. Another thing that these laws did is they set predictable standards for those zoning requirements. So an ADU can be 4 feet away from the property line. So it's a 4-foot setback. It's typically allowed to be up to 16 feet in height. And then there's different sizes of ADUs, which we'll get into in a minute. It's kind of a separate topic.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to hear. That's really good to hear. Now, you mentioned that you can only do this in like single family zoning, but like there's all kinds of zoning like RA and SU and RM, right? I mean, like, is SB 9 possible in these zonings, or are regular ADUs possible now in those zonings, or how does that play out?
Yeah, so again, the SB 9 law is separate from the ADU law. So SB 9 applies only to single family zone lots. The ADUs can be built on any residential lot. So if you had a multi-family zoned lot, you could still build an ADU. That's pretty common actually, where we'll see a duplex or triplex situation, and the property owner builds another rental unit using the ADU laws.
So, but is RA considered to be like a single family zoning, or like, because there's in the county there's R, right? There's R1, yeah. That's single family.
Right.
RA is not single family.
Correct. Yeah, I believe it is not. The other thing is that most RA, it's not even a question that comes up usually, because most RA zones are in areas that are not considered to be urban. So right. The other thing is that SB 9 only applies to urban areas, and urban is defined by the census.
So I've always thought urban meant urban services line, like you're inside where there's sewer and septic. Is that roughly, sewer and water? Is that roughly like public sewer and public water? Is that roughly what that is, or the census does not really respect that at all? It's different.
It's different. The census is a nationally used system for classifying land and creating boundaries around land. The urban services line and the rural services line is a local zoning regulation that the county uses for the purposes of services such as utilities, water, etc., but as well as for planning.
Right. So if somebody wanted to see if a property would qualify under SB 9, you would need to go onto the census website and like look up an address there and see if it's considered urban or not. Is that what I'm getting here?
Yeah, there are maps on the census website. You can roughly use the urban services line as a boundary. It doesn't exactly correspond. So you do need to do some due diligence and make sure that if you're in one of the outlying areas of the urban services, that you are in an urban area as far as the census is concerned. But if you're in like I mentioned before, Live Oak or off of SoCal, the standard areas where you see buses go by and lots of traffic, then you're probably in an urban area as far as the census is concerned.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I don't know, like a year and a half ago, maybe I was helping a buyer and they were considering an offer on a property in Dave Valley, and it was pretty close to Freedom Boulevard, but not on Freedom Boulevard. It was like I think it was off of, it was a Dave Valley Road it would have been off of. Anyway, that was on a well and it was on a septic, but the water line, like the central whatever it is, the Central Water District was like right there at the next door neighbor's house, right? All those like a 5-acre parcel. And so I asked the county about splitting that lot, and they said you could split it under SB 9. And I was like, really? You know, and I was like, why would that be? Because it's on a septic, because it's on a well. But I guess it must have been because it was somehow in the urban census. You know, I didn't realize that must be what it was, even though it was like a 5-acre parcel, like at the edge of, you know, an urban area, but not really. I mean, like it's pretty rural out there, but so I guess just check on the census website, and then you'll know. So that's good to know. All right. So how about the permitting process and the timelines and the fees? You mentioned that they had to get to you within 60 days with not a yes or a no, but some kind of response. But that's just for the initial thing, right? Like how long is it actually going to take for most people to actually get like a permit to build an ADU on their urban property?
Yeah, so I typically tell people to plan for a year
To get a permit.
from the beginning of design to getting a permit.
Really?
So
Wow.
yeah, so that means once you start working with a designer, because it takes I don't know, anywhere from 3 to 6 months for you to actually get to the point of submitting the permit application. So when somebody comes to us and they say, hey, we'd like to build an ADU, first we have to design the ADU with them. Then we have to get engineering completed and an energy analysis completed. Sometimes we also have to get a geotechnical report or a survey. And then there's occasionally situations that come up around changing design once we get those technical reports. So that whole process on the front end is something that is, you know, people don't really plan for, and it can take up to 6 months. And of course, it can be longer if the person wants to play around with a bunch of different designs. Then once you submit the permit, we have, even though it's supposed to be an expedited timeline, we'll have situations where, and this depends on whether it's the county or one of the cities, but sometimes they'll take 2 to 3 weeks just to do the intake on a project, meaning to actually accept or acknowledge acceptance of the fact that you've submitted a permit. So, and then they assess the fees, they send you a bill, and the clock for them does not start ticking until they've finished the intake and you've paid the fees. So sometimes a homeowner gets a bill and they're like, oh, I'm gonna have to wait a few weeks or a month to pay this. So that adds time to the clock. So there's all these little things that end up, you know, just adding 6 months sometimes to the process. It's also not uncommon to see cities just kind of blatantly not following the expedited review process.
Shocking. Really?
Yeah, shocking,
Wow.
right? Yeah.
That's shocking.
Yeah, so while I'm not one to report a city to the state, they, you know, it actually is something that they could theoretically get in trouble for doing. And we do see that quite frequently around this area. So in terms of costs, I just want to not forget to answer that question because that's
very
one
important.
that comes up.
Everyone wants to know what's going to cost me.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I hear 6 months to a year of design work. I hear cha-ching. That's what I hear in the background.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of it is waiting. Honestly, it's just a lot of waiting for, you know, the county to get back to you. Or sometimes, you know, when we hire an engineer, the engineers we work with typically take about 3 to 6 weeks, depending on the complexity of the project.
Well, let's just address that right there, like geotechnical engineering and all that. Like, what's that cost? Like, I hear engineering, I hear tens of thousands of dollars. What is it really?
So, let me just back up and answer the question: what should I budget for soft costs? Because there's a lot of different. There's a lot of different types of engineers that could be involved, and there's also the designer or architect. and the surveyor, etc. So typically a good rule of thumb that we like to use is 10 to 15% of your construction costs. So whatever that 10 to 15% is, put that on top of your construction costs. Construction costs, we're thankfully out of the pandemic era pricing, which things really skyrocketed. So we're seeing more like $350 per square foot up to $650 per square foot. An ADU, if you're doing like rental finishes, as we call them, which means, just kind of standard quality, resilient finishes, that'll be on the lower end of that range. But if you're customizing this because you want your kids to live there, or you're going to live there and rent out the main house and you want nicer finishes, put that on the higher end. It also depends on how many bathrooms you're doing and how large the ADU is, of course, how complex it is. So anyway, for an ADU construction costs, the lowest end that we end up seeing is around 200,000. And then that can go up, as high as you want it to, really, but 200 to 600,000 for the really big, nicely done high-end finish ADUs. Those are your construction costs. And then again, that 10 to 15% on top of that for everything from the designer to the engineer. Sometimes there's up to 3 engineers involved, the survey, et cetera, other specialists.
Well, also like utility lines, right? You got to like trenching for the sewer, right? Which a lot of people don't really consider. If you're running a trench, 50 feet to the street, right? Tie into the sewer main. What? This is a lot of money here. A lot of people don't. Oh, go on.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say I'm writing a blog post on this because there are actually a lot of hidden costs that people don't realize. One of the things that I always like to stress to people is exactly what you're talking about. Is utilities alone can add a pretty significant cost. Like 10 to 15,000 for a single utility. That could be sewer. Some cities require that you underground electrical. And one nice thing, actually, side note, if you're doing this under SB 9 as a building permit, they can't require you to underground utilities. They can't require improvements beyond the property line. So going back to the unexpected costs, we often see a requirement for an upgrade to the water line. Most water lines in this county were sized at 3/4 inch. And usually once we add the additional kitchen and bathroom for the ADU, we end up having to upsize that to an inch line.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And how about like solar panels? Don't they make you put solar panels on your ADU too?
Yeah, you can put them on the main home, but there are solar requirements. If you're doing a conversion ADU, that is actually something that's waived. So that's a nice little side note there.
Right, but they don't make you put fire sprinklers in unless you have fire sprinklers in your main house. Is that also correct?
That is one cost you get out of. Yes, you also get out of the cost of impact fees if the ADU is under 750 square feet. And then there's even further fee reductions, permit fee reductions, and service fee reductions if the ADU is 500 square feet.
Oh, well, that's good to know. All right. So 10 to 15%, and let's just say an ADU, like a low end ADU, is going to cost you like $300,000. Let's just say, reasonably speaking, that's for the construction cost. Because a lot of times people think of the cost, they don't realize all these other costs. So we're talking like after permitting has been done, after the site has been prepared, right? After you have the trenching, the grading, all that, right? But that doesn't include the foundation, I guess, right? So $300,000 just for the building plus 10 to 15%, and probably 10% is probably on the low end, right? That would be unusually low cost. Let's just call it 15%, right? 15%. So basically 300 plus 45 or so. So maybe 345. So I think people should on the low end maybe budget like 350 for an ADU, something like that. And then construction, how long? you're not involved in the building part, but what do you think? Is it like 6 months to build an ADU? Is that what it takes? Or
Yeah, that's about right. It's the longest part is getting the permit. The construction timeline varies a little bit based on inspector availability. And weather, of course. So for example, there's certain times of the year where you just can't trench because all the work will be gone in another week from the rains. And then sometimes we get backlogs due to the lack of staff for inspections. But typically 6 months once you actually get the permit, sometimes up to a year, again, if it's a really complex project or you're doing a lot of underground utilities, or maybe you're attaching it to the house and you're doing a remodel with it, those kinds of things can drag out the construction longer.
Yeah, I could imagine. So, all right, well, that's good to know. I think that's going to be sobering information for like a lot of people. But what are the kind of challenges or conditions that make an ADU especially hard to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are probably the same challenges that you would find making it difficult to build a single family home. Going again to the utilities, if you have to do a lot of upgrades, that's going to be more costly. There are some areas, particularly in Scotts Valley, where you have to pay remediation fees. So there's the June beetle.
June beetles, yes.
The infamous June beetle. Or maybe there's protected trees, so you're not allowed to remove those. Most of the time the site constraints are related to environmental conditions. In the county, something to look for is the proximity to riparian areas, which are green areas near creeks or rodeos. And another thing that you'll want to look for is, and this is going back to the cost again, in the Soquel Creek Water District, you're actually required to put in a separate water meter for the ADU.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, so that's actually, that can be really, really expensive.
Yeah, well, that's me. I'm in Soquel Creek Water District. What are they, 15 grand? What do they cost?
Minimum 15 grand. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, they've got a rate chart and it depends on the size of meter that you're putting in, but
wow.
it's really expensive. Now,
they really soak you in Soquel Creek Water District.
The Soquel Creek Water District is they're on the highest end of any water district I've seen. And we don't just work in Santa Cruz County, we work in Santa Clara as well. But one little tip is that if you're doing a conversion ADU in the Soquel Creek Water District, you don't have to put in a separate meter. So if you have a garage, you might want to consider giving up the garage for the ADU.
Right. Yeah. Good to know. Good to know. So, how about are there any you mentioned you get a reduced impact fee if it's 750 square feet or less, but are there any other limitations that 800 square feet under SB 9, I guess, is a limit, but how about not under SB 9? And how about design? I hear that some areas they want you to make your house look like all the your ADU look like all the other houses in the neighborhood or something. Can you talk about those kind of restrictions that might be out there?
Yeah, so generally speaking, the ADU should match the main house, so it should look architecturally similar. Any city or county has to allow you to build an ADU of 800 square feet. So they can't restrict the ADU to be any smaller than that. But above 800 square feet, there's a lot of variation in code. Most locations allow something greater than 800 square feet. 1,000, 1,200 square feet is also pretty common, but typically if they're going to allow more than 800 square feet, then you're going to be required to do 2 bedrooms. So the sweet spot, I think, for an ADU is 750 square feet because it's a nice size, livable space. You get 1 bedroom and the bathroom out of it, and you get a lot of reductions on permit fees. And then in terms of costs and kind of the easiest design, simplifying the architectural style of the ADU, just doing a rectangular unit or a box unit. I know it sounds boring, but it's going to be the most cost-effective construction project or design for your construction project.
How about like parking limitations? Do they make you put parking in from your ADU, or what's that like?
Yes, so the law allows for parking exclusion or no parking requirements if you're within 1/2 mile of a transit stop. Now, that rule does not apply if you're in the coastal zone. So if you're in a coastal area, check and make sure and see if you're in the coastal zone. And
How do you
coastal
check and make
zone
sure if you're in a coastal zone? Where do you go for that? The GIS website, is that where you go?
Exactly. Yeah, the county has a GIS website that has that all outlined, and it's a very jagged line, so you can't just know. You sometimes I think a property is going to be in the coastal zone, and it's not. You just never quite know.
Right. Is it roughly the freeway? Is that roughly where it is? I mean, is that like a good rule of thumb, or no?
It jogs in and out a lot. Yeah. So you really should check because it does not follow the freeway.
Right. Well, old wives' tale, I guess, but it's the freeway.
Yeah. It's surprising. I don't know how that line was created in the first place. So in the coastal zone, they can require a parking spot. Typically, the most you're going to be required to do is 1 parking space. And then in a lot of situations, you can get out of providing any parking at all.
Okay. And so is 1,200 square feet the maximum size of an ADU in Santa Cruz County, or is it possible to build one bigger than that? Like if you're out in the country somewhere, you have a gigantic parcel, is that?
No, actually in the county, it's 1,000 square feet. And the city used to allow 1,200. I think they're back down to 1,000. And then in other locations, like in Santa Clara County, they'll allow to 1,200.
Really?
But that's just the biggest I've seen. It's pretty common to do 800 and then 1,000 square feet. Those are the 2 breaking points.
So 1,000
and then to get
and
then to get that 1,000, you have to have 2 bedrooms. So again, I lean towards 750 square feet, unless you've done really well thought out financial analysis and have determined that you can pay yourself back better by doing a 2-bedroom and you're going to rent this thing out for, the 15, 20 years, and you need to make all that back.
Right. Speaking of which, my understanding is that under SB 9 that through 2024 or through 2025 that you can build an ADU specifically for rentals, because prior to that the county would make you not rent it out, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, you know anything about that?
Yeah, so it's under the ADU laws that you currently can build an ADU and you're not required to occupy the property. And there are also something called junior ADUs. Those do require homeowner occupancy. But right now, you can build an ADU and you don't need to live on the property. In 2025, that will change. That allowance will sunset, and the cities can either require it or not require it. And some may continue to allow for a person who owns a property but doesn't live there to build that ADU. And others may require homeowner occupancy. Now, homeowner occupancy doesn't mean that you need to live in the ADU. It just means you need to live on the property. And you can still rent out the ADU. You just need to be on the property as a full-time owner.
So what happens if you do that, and then at some point you move off the property, like 5 or 10 years, plans change, I got to go out of town, I don't want to sell my property, I want to rent the whole thing out. You have to have one tenant for both properties essentially, or do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, so the way the city currently does it is they make you sign a land use agreement that gets recorded with the deed saying that and that land use agreement will have in there whether or not you're required to occupy the property. Other cities around the area don't require that, or the county doesn't require that. So I don't really know how they track it, but technically you're not supposed to do that. I'm not sure that I've never heard of anybody getting caught for not occupying the property that they're supposed
Right.
to be occupying.
So that sunsets January 1st, 2025. So is that right? It sunsets not December 31st, but January 1st. Is that when that?
I'd have to check on that. I think, but yeah, it's probably January. And the other provisions of the law that allow for, you know, the height, the setback reductions, all those things will remain in place. But the one thing that's sunsetting is the allowance for homeowner occupancy.
And so would it be that I have to have my permit finalized by then, or construction finalized by then, or can I apply on December 30th and I'm good at that point? Do you know, or no one knows?
I don't know. My guess would be that if you have applied for a permit prior to then and you're in the cycle of responding to comments and, you know, doing whatever working on whatever technicalities the city or county has asked for, that they will allow you to keep that that old code or law. That's typically the way it works with building and planning code, is that when you get the benefit of whatever code you apply for the permit under.
And you would have to have done all your geotechnical work and all the design before you apply for a permit. You can't just apply for a permit with an idea of like, here's my napkin, here's where my ADU is going to go.
Yeah.
You have to do all that ahead of time. So you can't just like on a lark on December 30th just say, okay, I'm going to apply for a permit now. You have to really be maybe working for maybe a year. So if you want to do that, you better get cracking right now, right, on getting your permit in if you want to have that done. All right, note to self. All right, so what is the fastest and least expensive kind of ADU to build? Like I see these like ads like all over the place now, like, hey, just have an ADU like, you know, craned into your house on an existing foundation. We'll bring it in on a truck, right? Or we have these panelized systems that are just basically like ADU kits, right? Like, but what is the fastest and easiest way to build like a durable ADU? Not something's going to fall apart in 25 years, but you know, like a really good product. Do you know of anything?
I haven't seen a prefab or modular system that comes in lower cost than a standard stick and frame house, you know, or ADU. By the time you account for the transport and the crane, and you know, their additional percentages that they put on the soft costs, it comes out to about the same amount that you would have spent if you were building it using a traditional method. So I'm a pretty big proponent of just sticking with doing what we know works. The other thing that I see that is kind of a complaint I've heard about these SIP or panel or modular construction homes is that they're really hard to modify for electrical and plumbing. Because they all use these proprietary systems. So if you wanted to, I don't know, do a kitchen renovation, then you've got to hire a specialist or somebody who knows that system, or you might even have to replace some of the exterior panels as well. So again, it's in my opinion, more cost beneficial, more durable, more resilient, and probably a little bit more sustainable to just do a traditional stick and frame house.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. And I've always thought that, you know, like people throughout my career have said like, what if I just like buy a piece of bare land and put like a manufactured home on it, right? And that doesn't really happen very much. And the reason why is because it doesn't actually cost that much less than you think it's going to cost, because of all these other site prep, permitting, engineering. None of that changes. Really, the only thing you might save on is something in the construction cost. But at the end of the day, you usually have a property that's not worth as much for whatever reason. Maybe some of those reasons which you just stated, that, you know, that going that route, you might shave a little bit of cash, you know, up front, but long term, probably it's not going to save you anything. Maybe even possibly cost you more, I guess. So how long does it take to build one of these things by hand from scratch, right? I mean, like what have you seen in the field in terms of actual, like, okay, got everything done, we're getting the guys out tomorrow to start. How long does that take usually for like a 750 square foot ADU?
Yeah. My sense of it is it is about 6 months to 9 months. It's funny because I do all the permit work. I do all this like work to prep and design the home, and then I hand it over to the contractor, and I'll hear from the contractor maybe once or twice during the construction process. So unless the homeowner is really good about keeping in touch with me, I don't often know the exact time frame. There are a lot of contractors that we work with around town who, we know have a consistent, reliable process and can get it done in that time frame. But it also, if you work with somebody who's kind of independent, does all their own work, not to say that's bad, because a lot of times people who work independently are very fastidious about the quality of their work, but that can take longer, right? So one of the things that that somebody might want to look for in a contractor is, do they have their own crews, or are they, subbing out a lot of the work? And how far booked out are they? There's some indications of how quick and responsive they might be. And again, not to say that hiring a solo guy is a bad thing. It just depends on, what kind of build you're looking for.
Right. Okay. And so, speaking of which, are you usually hired by the contractors or the homeowner? I mean, it sounds like you work with both together, hand in hand, or both of them.
Yeah, we have clients that are contractors. So, and we have clients that are homeowners. So sometimes the initial phone call comes from the actual property owner. They may not live on the property. Sometimes we also work with investors. And then I do also have a number of clients that are contractors that they have a vision for what they want to build. They get their own clients and they come to me and they say, okay, here it is. They hand me the napkin, in other words. And then I take that napkin and create a permit set out of it.
I would imagine if I were to hire you to build my ADU, that I'd be sending you like pictures all the time. Anna, look, right? No, keep in touch with you. No, doesn't happen like that, huh?
No, I wish more clients would like keep me posted. I think like by the time people start working with the contractor, they're just so excited to like actually see the thing coming to life. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of clients who've been great about it, but others are just like, see ya, move on.
Right. Yeah, I get it. So what do people find to be the most surprising or difficult process about building an ADU, would you say?
Probably the waiting, the timeline, because there's a lot of, excitement when these laws first came out about the expedited review and how much easier it's going to be. And it is a lot easier than it used to be. I mean, a lot easier, but it still takes a while to get a permit. The other thing is the cost, which we already covered, and the utilities that people end up having to install. At some point, I don't know how this started, but there were all these rumors flying around on blogs about how cheap it was to build an ADU. And it's a sizable budget that you need to construct one of these things.
Yeah, so I got that might be the other thing that surprises people is how much it ends up costing, because a lot of people I think have these ideas that it's not going to be that expensive, but it's like you're building like a little house, I mean, like that's not cheap.
Yeah. I mean, you save a little bit of money from the size, right? Because you're only doing one bathroom maybe instead of like 3. But all of the grading, concrete, framing, roof, all of those expenses are still there. They're just a little bit more condensed.
Right. Well, plus you don't have to buy the land, right? I mean, the land is obviously very, very expensive. So you get that for free, right? But you still have to do all the other work that you would have to do. Well, listen, I think I've really learned a lot of stuff here, and I bet you that pretty much anyone watching this is going to feel the same way. But is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you that people really need to know about building an ADU in Santa Cruz?
I mean, I think we covered a lot, and I really do hope it is helpful for people. I would say the only other thing I mentioned is that, and this is more common in Santa Cruz, but you can convert existing non-conforming buildings to ADUs. And so what that means is, let's say you have a detached garage or studio that was a workshop, but it's not 4 feet from the property line. It can be like within a few inches of that property line, and you can convert that structure into an ADU and even add a little bit of square footage to it. So that's one common situation I see people coming to me to ask for permit help on.
So like if there's like a garage, like it's very common for like an older garage to be built right up against the property line, maybe like a foot away, that can be converted into an ADU legally, even though it's out within the setback.
Yeah, yeah, we have to do all sorts of fire treatments to the wall that's closest to the property line, and the eaves are basically at 0. But you can keep that line. So if you've got a really constrained property and a structure like that, then definitely look at converting it, because it's something that never would have been allowed or is not allowed under any other law or code.
Well, I've got a question that begs the question: what if it was not permitted when it was built? Right? I mean, you have a lot of those, right? Especially out in the hinterlands, right? You know, where there's like an old funky workshop maybe that nobody got a permit for, but it's been there since 1976, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
Can you do that or no?
So the magic in it is the date. So if it was permitted before the 60s, I mean, if it was built before the 60s but not permitted, it probably won't know, because there weren't really great records before then, and it may be just grandfathered in at this point. One of the things that the county or the city will ask you to do is they'll ask you to go pull what are called private assessor records. So you go into the assessor's office as the property owner, and you request the old handwritten assessor records, and they used to come through and physically check the property, what structures were there, and make little notes on that. And so if the structure shows up in those notes prior to the county or the city keeping good permitting records, then they'll allow you to convert it, because it shows that it was built there, and they didn't have the proper permit methods in place at the time, so you can convert that thing.
But a lot of times, though, these old assessor records, which I see all the time, you'll say, "Oh, well, we picked it up like in 1972, right? Like here's one from 1963, but then in 1972, like we picked it up, it didn't used to exist. There's no permit for it. They're not going to let you convert that to an ADU."
That would be problematic. Yeah.
That would be problematic. Okay.
Yeah. So, and this is variable depending on what city you're in. So I had a project in Capitola where the garage, there were no records for, or not good records for. I was detached garage and right on the property line, and they let them convert it. So it really depends on the city. You're kind of in a discretionary zone at that point. The county and the city of Santa Cruz tend to be more strict about these things than Capitola. Scotts Valley, I haven't actually seen an attempted conversion project for a situation like that in Scotts Valley. Most of the time when you see a structure that old, it's in unincorporated Santa Cruz County.
Yeah, well, Scotts Valley is pretty new anyway, right? And they're pretty good about their record keeping since they got created. So, all right. Well, I think that's about all we have time for. I really want to thank you. How can people get a hold of you, though?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So our website is om-design.io. That's omdesign.io. And my email address is ana@om-design.io.
And that's the best way, is email, or do you do text messaging? Email is the best way.
Once a client's established with me, I will take text messages, and we'll often communicate that way. But email is so much easier, because I can't tell you how many spam calls I get a day.
Right. Sure. It was also nice to have everything all in one place. I mean, like I love email for that reason. Like everything's in there. Google. I mean, I use Gmail, right? It's not hard to find stuff in your email, so it's a very good place for everyone to go. All right, well, that's all that I think we had on our agenda today. I want to thank you so very much for making the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, Ono. Talk to you later.
Alright, that's all I have for this video. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope that you got a lot out of it and that you learned a good deal about what it takes to actually build an ADU in Santa Cruz. I have referred a number of clients over to Anna, and all of them have had wonderful experiences working with her. So I do encourage you to reach out to her and pick her brain if you have any questions about actually building an ADU in Santa Cruz County. Alright, that's all I have for this video. Thanks again for watching, and please, stay tuned.